Well, with the State of the Union finally out of the way, we can focus on more important things, and that's a look at psychology and religion and how we can improve our lives day to day, because that's a big reason why I'm here. It's not just to talk about current events and to talk about our politics and how that's changed me politically, but also kind of a spiritual revolution that has taken place for me in my time out here in Southeast Asia, and I would like to tell you more about it in response to a great I guess it was a talk, a study, ask the pastor type series with Pastor Tim Conway, and I was really moved by it, and I could relate it to a few things, and I thought I would share my findings, my gleanings, with you here today on Jinkajabo. So when I first started watching YouTube, and what led me to actually start making my own videos was following the skeptics of all people. Like, I first got turned on to the Bible Reloaded, which led to T.J. Kirk, then known as the Amazing Atheist, Styx back in the day, and Sargon of Akkad, which led me to Milo Yiannopoulos, which made me a Republican, which led me back into following the church anyway, or following church channels. And I'm not sure when I found Pastor Tim Conway. I'll be honest, is the channel linked below in the description. Please add him, subscribe to him. He has lots of subscribers, but he needs more. I'm not sure how exactly I found him, but he kind of reminds me of another pastor, a priest I used to listen to back in college, Father Karapi in the Catholic Church, who had some really out there kind of Hunter S. Thompson type stories before he found the priesthood, and same thing with Tim Conway. He's really an interesting character with a great just screen presence. I don't know. It's one of many speakers I've found so far, and one of the first few Christians that I've subbed. But anyway, he gave a great talk on anger this morning, or I found it this morning. It had just been released maybe a couple days ago. And someone asked him about dealing with the emotion of anger as a Christian. And he broke it down very thoughtfully, first going through Scripture, of course, like any good pastor would, getting the audience to read and everything. And there's a great thing about his videos. He always has, you can hear in the background, there's always a kid playing or something, sometimes at inappropriate times, but he leaves it in, and that gives it more of a natural sense. But anyway, just like being in church for real. But anyway, he gets a letter from this guy who's 28 years old, and he's got 2 toddlers, and he's providing for his family, and he comes home, and the kids are very loud, and he doesn't know how to deal with his anger, because like, he just doesn't feel appreciated or anything. And so Pastor Tim goes through the scriptures, of course, and then he talks about, I'm going to mince his words, I'm not even going to try to quote him here, but he talks about how unreasonable it really is to be angry when we truly think of what God has given us. And he goes back to one of my favorite books in the Bible, and incidentally, one of my favorite books in the Quran, under the name Yunus, but in the Bible it's Jonah. Yunus in the Quran is it's not as allegorical. I think it's more of a well, I won't get into that, but I would like to compare the two at some point. But anyway, the story of Jonah is, of course, how Jonah, is a prophet commanded by God, goes to save Nineveh, but he's unable to save them. He gets eaten by the whale and so on, and Pastor Tim points out that there are only 2 points in the Bible where God really responds to the anger of man, and one of them is with Jonah, when Jonah survives being eaten by the great fish or the whale, or however we translate it. Quick aside, taxonomy in the Bible is a bit strange because bats are considered birds in the Old Testament, but anyway. Jonah is on his own after trying to save Nineveh, and Nineveh gets destroyed, and so God creates a plant with a gourd to feed him, and so he rests there through the night, but then he wakes up, and the gourd has rotted away, and it's gone. Which reminds me of the book of Job, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed be his name. But Jonah gets very angry, and God says to him, "Look, you just don't understand." Or however God says it, not as Jinka Jabo says it, but in the words of God, it's something like, "I felt sorry for all these people, and not only that, but I felt sorry for their cattle as well," which is, in modern language, kind of a humorous way to end a book of the Bible, or to end a story, not a book of the Bible, which has all sorts of weirdness in its pages. But the idea is that we must approach the truth with the feeling that we don't understand God exactly. Just like, a dog might be loyal to us but not understand why we're giving it a shot or something, And to trust in God. Anyway, these are just some... it's the scriptural basis for what he was talking about. But he was also saying, in practical life, the guy who... I'm just going to end up quoting his paraphrasing this Pastor Tim's entire speech. But anyway, the same guy who comes home and his kids are screaming and he's acting very angry and he yells at them, "Shut up!" If the UPS guy were to ring the doorbell, he would answer the door and he would collect himself and he would say, "Okay, well, how are you?" He'd act very polite with a stranger delivering him a gift, And what that proves is that in instances of anger, we have a choice. And this kind of, it made me think of it's a previous video I did, 50,000 Decisions You Make. But anyway, the idea that every thought, every circumstance, there is an element of choice. And as opposed to many who want to say that because of genetic conditions or because of how we're treated or because of unfortunate circumstances or because, I would extend it to exclude the whole specter, the term I used ironically, which leftists have thrown back to me very seriously. This idea of a specter, this idea of a haunting a force that oppresses some and allows others to rise to the top. You can blame anything for your circumstances, but when you look at it, when you look at just everyday situations, if you come home and your kids are screaming, but then someone knocks on your door and suddenly you're polite to them, you realize that at every moment you at least have the choice. And so when you don't make that choice, and we all make mistakes, of course, everyone sins, right? It's sort of the distinction between sin and mistake, which I'd like to get into at some point. But anyway, because of all that, it's so tempting just to say that it's not really your fault. You just want to pass the blame. But the fact is, we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And what a positive message. When I think that situations that I've been in recently, without getting into detail, because honestly, everything was blown out of proportion. Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. But the fact is, in recent times, or even looking back at my past, the times when I approached a situation with gratitude and assumed people were doing their best and didn't want to feel hurt by someone because it matters so much more to feel hurt than it does to really take responsibility. It's such a lazy thing and it's such a horrible habit that we all do, but it's good to be aware of it at least. One of my friends out in Illinois, he would always complain about people he knew. He would always look for blame, and he was so focused on that. And that made me think of a saying of the Buddha, and I'm not sure exactly where it's from, but maybe Lankavatara Sutra or something. But the Buddha says, man walks around with a poison arrow in his heart, and rather than pulling it out, he spends his entire life trying to figure out where the arrow came from. So to connect it with the Eastern tradition, the very fact is we need to learn to be grateful for the things we already have, because that'll make us stronger when it comes to situations that bring out the anger. And it'll make it easier to forgive both ourselves for having weakness and knowing that having made the wrong choice, we can make a better choice next time. But it also helps us to forgive others, knowing that they're going through the same process, that same inner psychological hell. And it is truly a hell. It's truly for each person, it's bearing the cross. It's, not just pretending that the crown of thorns is not on their heads, but actually pulling it off thorn by thorn, which is maybe getting into a little more universalist territory than our friend Tim, but looking at or listening to his great message today really gave me that feeling, and it gave me a lot of hope, because as much as we like to push things off, like say I'm not going to do it, like I am the best when it comes to procrastinating. I have when I was in school, I would hold things off to the very last minute, and that's how I've done things with life, and it's really a messy way to get around, but at least becoming self-aware of your own faults is a major step towards correcting them. And then finally, as the Course in Miracles says many, many times, which I'm about through with, by the way, and I'll get to that later, we have to be aware of how many decisions we are always making, and how each decision can push us in a good direction or a bad direction. And that's so critical. That's so key. Anger is a choice, and we have to realize that. And why do we make that choice? Behind every sin, Pastor Tim says, behind every sin is a lie. And we need to learn to figure out where that lie is. What that lie promises us. That lie that says we'll feel better, that lie that says we'll be even, or that lie that says we'll mete out some form of justice. But that's really not how it works. That's not how the ego works. So you don't have to be a Christian or a Buddhist or anything to appreciate this message, the simple message that if you realize that anger is a choice, you'll be less prone to make that choice. And that's all I've got to say for now. Peace.